Welcome back. So at this point, you should have completed your midterm, and we don't have class on Wednesday, so it's a good week to take a little bit of a breather. I haven't assigned any reading this week. We'll pick up with the readings on the Americas, right? So we've covered a good, I don't know, 1,000 to 2,000 years of history in the Mediterranean and in Asia and in Central Asia. So starting next week, we're going to sort of shift over to the Americas and talk about the Mayan civilization, which at this point has really no contact with the civilizations we've been talking about. But before we do that, we'll take a little breather and think about your next big task, which is to write a term paper. So in this term paper, I don't just want sort of summary of the material, which is what the midterm is for. What I'd like you to do is be academics, come up with an original thesis and argue for that thesis. Some people find that phrase that way, they find it sort of scary. How do I do something original? So I thought I'd devote a whole lecture just to how to approach writing the term paper. So that's what we'll be talking about today. It shouldn't be super long. So in my opinion, most courses teach you to write bad papers. In this course, I tried to help you to write something a little bit better by writing it more slowly, right? Going through a draft stage before we get to the final paper stage. So this draft that is your next big assignment um, is pretty low stakes in that if you turn in something that looks like a honest attempt, right, at a full paper that attempts to argue for original thesis, you will get the full points. Now, when I say full paper, it's not an outline, it's not a list of notes, it's not half a paper, it should be an entire essay. But it doesn't have to be a good essay, right? It's okay if the arguments have some problems, if your thesis needs some work. Um, but I do this in a relatively low stakes way to force you to start working on the paper early. Just get something on the page that you can later revise. Most of writing is really the revision, right? And people often get hung up on just staring at the blank page. So the point is to get you past that, get things on the page, get comments back from me, so then you can start revising. Revising is much easier, and that's actually where the important stuff happens. It may well be the case that your paper changes radically from where it was in the draft, but change will be much less painful once you've got something on the page. So the topic for this paper is completely open. You may write on anything from the course. This course has been a very broad survey of world history. We've not been able to get any real depth on any particular topic, right? It's really like here's all of, not even all of world history, it's like a particular subset of world history, but it's still incredibly broad, right? So I don't expect that everyone is like absorbing all of it in any meaningful way, but I do want you to find something that you can engage with deeper way that you can. I mean, my experience as an undergraduate is that I walked away and quickly forgot most of the stuff I learned, but there were a few things that I found interesting that I wrote a paper on that stayed with me for the rest of my life. So I'm hoping you might find something from this course that you find interesting enough that you'll delve deeply into it and it will stick with you for the rest of your life. So I've made the essay topic completely open for that reason, right? Any particular thing sparks your interest, go with it. Follow that interest. I will give you um, some suggestion. I think the narrower the topic, the better. Right? Something like why did the Roman Empire, right, decline is pretty broad. Whereas if you could focus a bit more on, some particular issue, trade, right, women, some comparison between certain aspects of different empires, the narrower you get, the better the paper is going to tend to be. Because, again, this essay is not a review, it's not a regurgitation of the information from the class, argument for a specific thesis. So when I'm asking you to be an academic, right, be a be a historian, right? This is like, this is not high school anymore, you're doing real academia. Um, I'm going to have to formulate an original thesis on a topic and argue for it. And that argument must be original. The thesis, the claims must be original. Now, when I say original, obviously I don't mean that this is going to be publishable. I don't mean that you have to exhaustively read all of the literature on the subject to make sure no one's ever written a similar object or a similar argument. When I say original, I mean relative to the course, right? The readings that you've read, the lectures that you've seen. I'd like to see an idea that didn't get put in your head from the text or from me, right? Um, so it might help to hear some examples, right? These are not, these are just off the top of my head, right? But they're sort of something of the scope that you might want to focus on, right? Maybe you would argue, so we heard in the lecture that Constantinople, obviously, last Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire lasted much longer than the Western Roman Empire, right? And it's interesting to speculate on why. One thing the text says is like, oh, the strategic position of Constantinople was so easy to defend that there were lots of points where it probably would have fallen earlier, but it just had this special position. Um, Maybe you want to push back on that, right? Maybe you want to uh, play devil's advocate and say, actually, maybe the strategic position of Constantinople wasn't so important, right? And maybe there was, in fact, maybe it wasn't all that defensible, or maybe there's another reason that stands out to me as more important, or of greater importance, or of equal importance, right? Um, so sometimes if you find a claim in the readings in the lectures that doesn't feel particularly supported to you, or you know, you feel like you want to push back on it, that's sometimes a good indication you got a paper topic there. If you're ever reading through, and part of the goal of discussions boards is for you to get those sorts of things on right out there so that you can kind of go back and look through your posts or even other people's posts and see if anything sparks an idea, right? You say, yeah, in this post I wrote that I didn't understand this one thing, and then, I got Nate's response, but I don't quite buy what the author was saying here. Um, that's often a good point, right? If you feel confused or you don't understand how what they say could be true, that doesn't always necessarily mean that they're just so smart that you don't understand it. Sometimes it means they made a mistake or that there's a good argument to be made against their claims, right? So feel free to push back against any claims in the text. History is constructed by humans, right, on very sparse evidence. Um, just because Burbank and Cooper wrote it, or Aristotle wrote it, or one of our other authors wrote it down, doesn't mean it's set in stone, right? It doesn't mean it can't be questioned, and that is where. Another example, we talk about women, right, in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, assuming that those categories mean roughly the same things they mean now. Um, but maybe they don't. Maybe you want to question that, right? Maybe you want to argue that gender categories in ancient Rome should be understood very differently than they are today. These are just, ideas I'm throwing out there. But that's the kind of thing, a little narrower in scope. Focus in on something in particular. And of course, always feel free to bounce ideas off of me in office hours or in the discussion posts, right? So I hope that's, again, this process of finding an original argument is kind of the hard part. It's also kind of the fun part. Um, it shouldn't be a drag. It should be fun, sort of bouncing off ideas, not holding on to them too tightly, right? Maybe you throw out an idea, it turns out it's, you hear back from me or from another student in the discussion boards, and you feel like, it's maybe not, maybe that one's not going to work, but maybe you come up with another idea. So yeah, just bounce around the original ideas. It's not like a weighty thing. It's kind of the fun part of doing real academia, the creative part of your brain instead of just digesting, regurgitating like you may do in some other classes. I don't know. So often people ask whether outside sources are required. I never make it a requirement because if I say you must, right, cite two or four outside sources, what I end up getting back is like finds a random quote that's sort of maybe related to the topic from some source, plugs it into the paper, and they check the box for the source. That's not the point, right? Um, if you need another source to make your argument convincing, yeah, then go look to it. If you find that you don't need an extra source, then that's fine. If you can do it just using the courses from the text, then by all means do it. I suspect that because this course is pitched at such a broad um, level, that when I ask you to focus in on something more narrow, you probably will have to seek out some other sources, do a little more research to make sure that your argument is convincing, make sure some of the ideas that you think you have are actually supported, right? We don't give a lot of detail on any one topic. So you'll probably be looking to outside sources, right? But only do it when you need to and when it supports your argument. Don't just do it arbitrarily. I'm not going to force you to do it. It's up to you. When you're looking for sources, academic journal articles are the better sources, right? If it's published in a journal, that's sort of the gold standard. But I'm not going to get mad at like other sources on the internet if you find, whatever you want to talk about gender in ancient Rome, and you find a Wikipedia article or something that sort of like talks about it a bit, helps you get your bearings before you then kind of find where you want to delve deeper into the academic journals. That's fine. Like I'm not going to say you can't browse the internet on your topic, but definitely the academic journals are much more trustworthy and are going to give you a much more sophisticated discussion of your topic and much more. Someone's written on almost every incredibly narrow topic, so you may not find what you're looking for on Wikipedia, but you may well find it in an academic journal. Um, one sort of caveat, right? So yeah, feel free to use outside sources. I imagine most of you probably will need to, but it's not an original thesis. When I say write an original thesis, I don't mean find an article that makes an argument and then just report to us about their argument, right? Again, I'm asking you to come up with a new idea out of your own head, right? So use other sources to give you the evidence you need to make your own argument, right? Don't just use their argument. So I hope that helps. I mean, coming up with an original idea is sort of a little mystical, right? How do those ideas pop into your head? I mean, I've seen pretty much all of you have had original ideas in the discussion post, so I'm not too worried about any of you. Um, had original ideas throughout this course as you read stuff, just now kind of pick your favorite one, right, and try to develop it. Feel free to talk to me, email me, come see me in office hours if you are not sure whether your idea is going to work and you want to bounce it off me. I love to do that. So as far as the structure, so I'm asking you to turn in a full essay for your draft, right? Um, Rating it very harshly. Um, so the structure should be you need an introduction, right? So you can't just launch into your argument or launch into the background of your argument. Um, for this length of paper, it's not a particularly long paper. Like I'm thinking 5 to 7 pages, whatever, double spaced, etc. In a page of this length, the introduction can be about a paragraph. That should be fine. Uh, Basically, what your introduction does is says, talking about gender in ancient Rome, right? I argue that gender should be understood this way and not this way, and I'm going to argue A, B, and C, right? So a little bit of background, set up the background of your topic, clear statement of your thesis, and a little roadmap to like the reasons you're going to give broadly. Writing a good introduction is tricky, right? You kind of have to give the reader an idea of like what you're going to say, even how you're going to argue for it and what makes it original. But then you do kind of have to do that in a small space. So do your best and we'll work on the intro, right? But it should have some intro. I should walk away from the first paragraph knowing what to expect, right? This isn't like I don't know, like a New Yorker article or something where you're throwing in surprises or you're trying to like reader in and trick them or whatever. And um, it's not like that at all. Like academic writing, fairly dry because can be so complicated, right? And sometimes hard to understand. You really need to just like make it very clear to the reader, hey, here's what I'm going to say. Then you say it, and then your conclusion, here's what I just said, right? Because it's easy for people to get lost. So once you've got your introduction, um, you're definitely going to need to do a fair amount of background, right? And this will sort of look like the midterm kind of thing, where you're just sort of giving the reader the basic background information they need to know to understand what they need to understand so that they can, when you get your original argument, they can keep up with you. So when you're writing, don't write for me, right? Don't assume that the reader knows anything, right? Write as though you're writing for someone who's an intelligent person but they just never heard of the Byzantine Empire, right? Or just don't know anything about the Mongol Empire. So that means you're going to have to get them up to speed, right? So if you're writing about, um, you know, the durability of the Byzantine Empire, you need to explain what the Byzantine Empire is, sort of what their relation is to Rome, how Rome didn't last that long, but the Byzantine Empire stuck around for a long time. And this can be a little tricky too. Obviously, you don't need to reproduce all the information from the course. You just need to give the reader only as much detail as they need to understand your argument. So doing that well is a tricky thing too, right? Giving them just enough, giving them enough to understand it, not going into too crazy detail, but also not leaving your reader totally lost in the woods without enough information to understand what you're talking about, right? So, if you do all this, right, you have your introduction, you sort of walk your reader up, hold their hand through sort of the history and the details up to where they're ready now to understand your argument. You're probably on page 3 or 4. That's fine. A lot of setup might be necessary, right? But now it's time to make your original argument. So you might wonder, what is an argument, right? What does an argument look like? Maybe you've never approached it in those terms, right? So an argument is just a conclusion that is supported by reasons, right? So the conclusion should be clear. This is what you want your reader to walk away believing, right? And then you're going to give them reasons to believe that. So if you're arguing that the defensibility of Constantinople was not the main reason for the empire's durability, um, there's lots of different ways you can make that argument. You might argue that it wasn't even actually all that defensible, right? That all that emphasis is kind of mistaken, right? And it could have been conquered or whatever. Or maybe you say um, having a single capital isn't really even all that important, right? We saw with the Islamic empires that they didn't really have, um, a fixed, Mecca was their capital, but they also got kicked out of it, so they only occasionally made pilgrimages to it. So maybe too much emphasis has been made on capitals in the first place, right? Or maybe you might argue that some other factor, right, the way that the Byzantines adopted Eastern practices of governance, right, with the eunuchs, that was more important for their longevity than Constantinople. Maybe you do a little of all three, right? But that's sort of what we mean by an argument and reasons, right? You're making a claim and then you're giving various reasons for why that claim would be true. And there's a lot of options for how to make. Oh, feel free to talk to me at any point. So, and then so now you're on, I don't know, page 3 or 4, and you've made your original argument, right? When I read it, again, it's just a draft. I'll probably notice maybe some holes in the argument, some ways to push back, right? And I'm going to give you some comments, right? And I'll say, well, I like your thesis, right? Or maybe your thesis isn't that clear. Do you mean A or do you mean B, right? And clear that stuff up. And I'll look at your argument and be like, yeah, this premise works, right? This reason you give for your conclusion works. This one I'm not so sure is convincing, but then also you should maybe consider this other possibility, right? What if, someone who disagreed with you said this, right? So all that feedback I'm going to get from you is a way to like pad your paper out, right? Because I find often that students have trouble filling up even 5, 7 pages, right? They think they're kind of at page 3 and they think I think I kind of did everything I can do, right? Or whatever. They just find the act of writing sort of like difficult. Um, and then if they think, well, I got to hit 5 pages or I'm going to be in trouble, then what they'll tend to do is just saying stuff, right? That's sort of related to the Roman Empire or whatever. And that's usually has to just be cut anyway, right? So if you got a pad, right? If you think, first of all, if you think you've made your argument convincing and you think you're done, you probably haven't yet. Probably there's a lot of stuff that's in your head that didn't make it on the page, right? So it's not going to totally make sense to the reader until you actually get it on the page. That's fine. I'll give you comments if that's the case. But another thing you can do is consider objections, right? So I'm going to give you some objections when I grade your draft, but you can also practice trying to think of objections on your own, right? So you've made your argument and you're only at page 4 or something. Now you can sort of put on another hat, right? And say, okay, what if I was Nate, right? Trying to find something wrong with my paper, right? What if I was someone who disagreed, who was really, convinced that um, whatever, like that understanding of gender is the same in the Roman Empire as it is in today's empire, right? And how might they respond to my argument? And try to think of like what could be wrong with your argument, what could somebody say, and then respond to that. Often you'll find that academic articles are they make their argument and it's kind of the beginning, and like a big chunk of the rest of the paper is just responding to objections. Right? So that's the great way to pad. If you need to pad by considering objections and responding to them. Right? That doesn't just look like padding, that looks like you've thought things through very carefully. Right? Okay, so hopefully this is enough to get you going. People often ask about the details. I'm not super hung up on this stuff. I want to see a good argument. If it comes in, if you make an amazing argument in 3 pages, fine, right? But most people, I'm saying it should be a 5 to 7 pages, and people often want to know, well, like what's the spacing and stuff. So we'll just say it's 5 to 7 pages, double spaced, 12-point font, 1 inch margins, right? Come up with 4.5, you're not going to lose points. Right? Feel like you need 20 pages to say what you want to say. Okay, write the 20-page paper, right? That's fine. I'll read it. Um, what I want is a good paper, at least a better paper than you might have written for another class where you just kind of the night before try to vomit something on the page real quick, right? So I'm thinking about quality. I'm not worried about like all these specific things about margins. Put it there because people always ask, right? So this process is like all about, yeah, you're going to throw something out there. It's going to have problems. You're going to hear back from me. Then when you hear back from me, you might have some more questions, right? You might not totally quite get what I'm saying in my comment, or I might have actually accidentally been ambiguous or something. Or maybe you'll have another idea and say, okay, I want to give up my old idea and I want to try this other thing. Use me, right? I will be available even though this is a remote course. So office hours, are 2 to 3 on Wednesdays, right? But if that doesn't work for you, email me. We'll set something else up. If you want to email me a draft or something and get some comments back early, that's fine too. Or if you just have an idea and you want to type up a paragraph and send it to me. So yeah, feel free to stay in touch, and I want to help. I want to walk you through this process. So, that is, I guess, it for now. And have a good holiday on Wednesday, and then we will be back in session reading on the Aztecs. Oh, and I think there's a mistake in the syllabus. I'll send an announcement. Page numbers for chapter 1 of the Maquillip, sorry, not the Aztecs, the Mayans, um, is wrong. Just read chapter 1 on the Mayans for next week, right?